Today we're going to have a presentation on clinical research by Susan, and if you guys could just all pay attention, try to stay off of your phones, get as much information as you can out of this, we would appreciate it. So if you guys want to give a little applause to Susan, we'll start our presentation.
Hi everyone, I'm Sagar Kawani, Graduate Assistant to the Director of Regulatory Affairs and Services at St. Petersen University. And so there's the breaking news that we have moved from our old facility that was in Maple Grove to a new facility which is high-tech, and it is in Plymouth, and it is in the vicinity of all the medical device companies. So it is in the right location. So now I'll hand over to Susan and she can carry on, and please let me know if you have any questions related to any medtech programs. You can mail it to me, and we have the business cards of all the directors of all the 3 programs. You can mail it to them, and then you can get your queries answered. So thank you and enjoy.
So hi everybody, thanks for having me. I'm here on behalf of the adjunct faculty group associated with the applied clinical research and the regulatory affairs science graduate programs. And I did this presentation last year and went over, I guess, very well, so I'm back again and tweaked it a little bit, but otherwise it's very similar to talks that I give throughout the Twin Cities area. So in my part-time capacity, I'm an adjunct professor or instructor at the St. Cloud State University. I'm also a registered nurse in the state of Minnesota, but my full-time job is at Medtronic, where I manage all of the post-market surveillance for all of their products. And Medtronic, if you're familiar with the company, invented the pacemaker, so that's kind of an important thing to know. But they also then went on to develop implantable defibrillators, and they've since acquired all kinds of technology associated with different body systems, so spine, diabetes, orthopedic, extension of spine, all kinds of things. So I manage all of the surveillance products after they've been market approved and released all over the world, and so very involved in that space for many years. So why am I here talking about it today? Obviously, we have the 3 programs at St. Cloud State, both in quality, regulatory, and in clinical, both for the master's as well as a certificate in either of them. And my background, as I said, is in nursing. I originally got my Bachelor of Science in nursing from the University of Wisconsin. And I got so bit by the research bug when I was doing some of my clinical rotations and some of my actual experiences that I decided I really wanted to work in research. So I decided also I wanted to move away from Wisconsin. Not that Wisconsin's a bad place, but I just thought I needed to move someplace else. So I decided I wanted to come to the University of Minnesota. And there I got put on the bone marrow transplant floor, which anybody who's familiar with bone marrow transplant or leukemia, it's kind of a difficult place to work. And I worked there, now it's 30-some years ago, when it was 100% experimental. So every patient I took care of came in and signed a consent that said they had less than a 4% chance of surviving that procedure. And so you can imagine it was a difficult place to work, and also very high tech, like an ICU where you're running lots of drug pumps and blood transfusions, and a very intense environment. But we were doing research in order to try to cure or extend life of patients that had leukemia, and that was over 30 years ago. Today, bone marrow transplants are highly successful. There's over a 90% success rate. And really importantly, from an economic standpoint, back when I worked at the University of Minnesota originally, patients, it wasn't paid for by their insurance companies because it was experimental. So we had all of our patients selling their homes, their cars, having bake sales, I mean, you name it, in order to raise money at the time I think it was $150,000 for the bone marrow transplant. Living at the Ronald McDonald House out of the goodwill of people who donated their money so that families could stay together. Today it's paid for by insurance companies. Probably costs now closer to $600,000 to have a bone marrow transplant. But most importantly, it's successful. And people are living normal lives after having bone marrow transplant. So I've had the luxury of being involved in a lot of experiences like that over my lifetime. And both as a nurse and as a researcher have been able to navigate through lots and lots of different jobs. Never bored, always exciting. I've lived in different countries, I've worked for different companies, so very much a global view. Research is a global experience, it's not just a Minnesota experience. But a lot of it started here. So before I talk about the actual clinical research profession and the exciting job that entails, I just want to give you a little bit of a history lesson on why Minnesota. And hopefully I'll educate you in the process. I can be educated on how to use the clicker. Yeah, thanks. I just want to reinforce that there's a new location for the facility, which is wonderful. It is not only high-tech, but it's ours, right? It's before we were kind of renting a small space in another building, and this belongs to the graduate program, and it's just wonderful. It's got spaces where you can do your homework, where you can meet up with your classmates to work on projects together, and it's easy access as well, so I really like it. So, did you know, maybe some of you do know this already, lots of innovation has come out of Minnesota. So I already mentioned one, right, the pacemaker, but also organ transplants. So I was, after I was done with bone marrow transplant, moved into heart transplant program at the University of Minnesota, where it was very experimental, and we did the first heart-lung transplant there, and the first pancreas transplant. Minnesota is known for doing the first of many medical innovations. Insulin pumps were developed here, and I love that CPR was also developed here. And I did not know that. I did not know that until my son actually was dating a girl in high school, and we were at a wedding reception, and so I said, oh, I gotta go, I gotta teach a CPR class early tomorrow morning, and this little old grandma comes up with her cane, and she says, my husband invented CPR, and I'm like, yeah, right. She said, no, really, look him up. This is Maple Lake, Minnesota, which is, half hour from here. And I looked it up, and sure enough, he was a physician at Johns Hopkins, and they were doing research in an animal lab. An animal suffered cardiac arrest, and they decided to try compressions on the animal just to see what would happen if you pushed externally. Would it push the heart? And they resuscitated the animal. And it's 20 minutes from here, this little tiny town. So it's true. It was invented by someone from Minnesota, not in Minnesota. Next slide. Other things that have been invented in Minnesota may be less exciting, but I don't know about you, but I like toasters. A lot of fast food, before fast food, so convenience foods were invented in Minnesota, some of which are here, and some of whom now are being, I think Green Giant just got purchased by another company, so they're not necessarily Minnesota-based anymore. Next slide. Other fun inventions, water skis, of course, we're the land of 10,000 lakes, and then fun things like rollerblades, and I don't know if anybody plays Twister anymore, but if you haven't, you should. It's a fun game. So why Minnesota? I like to think of Minnesotans or Midwesterners as kind of hardy. I think we have an attitude toward get it done and overcome obstacles. I love this sign of the Dairy Queen. This is actually the Dairy Queen, one of them here in Sartell. And I happened to be driving by and I saw this sign and I thought, oh my gosh, I have to take a picture of this. This other one was in the Medtronic parking lot, which to me sums it up for Minnesotans. I can go boating and I can snowplow all in the same day, and we're ready for anything. But on the other side, it's really about the history of the state of Minnesota in terms of the economy. And because we have all the lakes and the rivers, etc., it was all about logging, milling, farming, and then utilizing the dams that exist within the rivers. And that necessitated invention of some of these medical devices. So I just have a little bit of a picture here of the St. Anthony Falls. I don't know if you guys have been down to St. Anthony Falls in the cities, but if you haven't, I would encourage you to make that trip too. It's a beautiful area. There's a little shopping center, movie theater, lots of fun restaurants, and a little river walk, and it's a beautiful area. This is what it looked like in the 1800s, and of course today it's just a booming area with all kinds of microbreweries and fun things. But back in the 1800s, when they were doing a lot of logging, milling, etc., people were losing their limbs. So they had people losing their legs and arms as a result of the big saws. And so the people needed artificial legs and artificial arms. And so this became a hotbed of, if you want a really good arm or a leg replacement, made out of wood, that's what they were made out of back then, you would come to Minnesota. Now, then we of course had the war where we had additional people losing limbs, and we've continued to build on that expertise. And recently, in 2012, we developed, again in Minnesota, the first bionic hand. I've got a picture of it here. So just to contrast and compare, so these are the limbs that I was referring to, made out of wood back in 1918, courtesy of the Minnesota Historical Society. And in 2012, we have this dynamic hand that responds to biofeedback and nerve synapse response, and he's able to actually use an opposable film, which of course is what separates us from animals, right? Most importantly, our cats. So other key inventions, I mentioned the pacemaker. Dr. Earl Bakken, honorary doctor, he's an engineer who worked with a physician, a surgeon at the University of Minnesota Hospital, who had a patient who was connected to an external pacemaker that Earl had invented in literally his garage in northeast Minneapolis. And they lost power due to a storm, a tornado in Minnesota, and the patient died because this external pacemaker didn't have a power source. So he went back to his garage and developed a battery-powered external pacemaker, but you still had wires sticking out through your chest. And then later went on to develop, how can I house electronics in something that can be put in the body so that you aren't relying on an external connection to a power cord? Because once you have a wire sticking out of you, you're more prone to infection. So he is still alive. I think he's 92. I actually, have met him and worked side by side with him several times. He resides in Hawaii now because he's become very interested in holistic medicine as well as traditional medicine. And they have a great program there. And he's just inventing today as much as he was back when he was in his 20s. So phenomenal guy. And then CPR, which we talked about. So Minnesota's known as Medical Alley, and now you have a little bit of a sense of, okay, why? What's the history here? And it's a corridor that really runs from Mayo Clinic down in Rochester up through Duluth. And all of the medical device companies are really, the main ones are all kind of in that space, which leads to some really interesting competitive situations too, where it's a business, right? But we're also all in the business of helping people and solving medical issues. And so there's a lot of healthy cross-fertilization of idea generation and innovation across the companies. And this Medical Alley was formed in order to kind of encourage that. It's not only, of course, medical devices, but biopharmaceuticals. So if that's something that you think you may be interested in, diagnostic devices, so not things you implant, but things that are used to help determine a disease state or track a disease state. And then, of course, digital health is exploding, right? The ability to track data. So if you're somebody who doesn't like blood, doesn't like being in an operating room, doesn't want to talk to doctors and nurses, there's still lots and lots of space that you can take a master's in any one of these programs and apply. They're looking for all kinds of brains. I think that's it. I think the other big piece here, of course, is about lowering costs, and I'll talk a little bit more about why that's so important. Next. So research is the fundamental underlying element associated with this. I think it's a fantastic career. I don't know if you can tell already, but I can't imagine doing anything else. I have had the luxury of working as a staff nurse to getting involved in some really wonderful research as somebody who's just taking care of a patient and recording data, but then moving into writing protocols, interacting with regulatory authorities. As I said, have had the opportunity to live in London for 2 years, where I helped work on a new implantable defibrillator, traveled all over Europe before it was even a European Union, and now it's interesting, the European Union might get disassembled, so in my lifetime I will have seen it kind of come together, and potentially with Brexit, see a change. I have worked for companies that are based in China, so I've spent quite a bit of time there. I've spent quite a bit of time in Japan. The most recent company I worked with, which was funded by Medtronic, was based in Israel. So I spent a lot of time in Tel Aviv, every 8 weeks or so, headed over there. So as I say, it's given me, this small town girl from Wisconsin, right, this global view of the world and how medicine and care of patients and research just transcends any cultural language differences that you may have. So I am not anywhere near done. I absolutely love being involved in it. The beauty of the Scsu program, which was started on the clinical side first, or on the regulatory side, the regulatory program first, I think it's been 8 years, is that it pulls together people like me who are working in industry, working in the medical institutions, universities, what have you, and we are the instructors. So we're still working in the areas, whether it's at a company, industry company, or working, like I said, at an institution. And so it's a real world experience. It's academic in the sense that we're telling you about laws and regulations and good clinical practice, things you have to follow, but we always have the capability of telling you not only about our stories from 32 years ago, but today I'm getting on a plane as soon as I leave here and going out to Washington, D.C., meeting with folks from the NIH because we're trying to come up with a way to standardize how we measure outcomes for strokes globally. And so there's a team of us that are coming together in order to do that. So that's just today. So there's always something new and different in the research space. So entry level into a research position for me was a clinical research associate, and I did that after I did my nursing gig, if you will, for a little while, where things are pretty controlled. I think Patty gave me this, Patty Fulner, who maybe some of you have talked with the director of the ACR program, that in Forbes 2016 was made the list of the top 3 careers. I did a little search in preparation for this discussion today just to make sure that it is still in the top 3. It is. I also wanted to look to see if I were going to try to be a CRA today, how many jobs are out there, and there's hundreds just within this little local area. When I started out as a CRA, it was for a drug company, and I traveled 4 days a week all over the United States. The 5th day was my kind of paperwork report day. But imagine what I had to learn in order to do that, right? So I knew a little bit about medicine and research, but learning how to get where I needed to go, interface with people I haven't met with before, and then figure out how to utilize their time successfully. It was just a fantastic job. You could see the pay as well here. So it comes in many varieties. If you're not somebody who wants to travel, you can also be what we call an in-house CRA. This means you're sitting in an office or a cubicle typically, and you're managing sites. And what's a site? That's a hospital or a clinic that's participating in research, and you can help be involved in collection of data. You can be remote based, working at home, which a lot of people really enjoy. And then some people do a hybrid where they're both internally and externally. I know Medtronic, they recently are encouraging everybody to work from home that's in this role. And they literally have a bank of lockers set up at the company where you keep your stuff in the event that you're going to be in the office working, but otherwise you're working remotely. And so, that affords you a lot more autonomy, independence, flexibility, if that's how you prefer to work. I have a lot of people on my team. I have about 50 people in my team right now who really like being in the office. They just can't function unless they're sitting at their desk at 7:30 every morning, and I'm not that way. I can work from home every day, so I appreciate the flexibility. So field-based, you're traveling to sites, hospitals, and clinics, interacting with doctors and nurses. You don't have to be a nurse to do this. I have hired teachers, people with teaching background. I've hired biology majors, chemistry majors, even engineers, all kinds of people. Good communication skills, the ability to look at information and understand the research process can successfully become a CRA. And then the big part of your job is looking at charts. So you do have to learn some medical terminology, but that's easy to learn. And then reviewing what we call regulatory documentation to make sure that there's compliance to the law. So what does it take to succeed in a job, a kind of entry-level clinical research position? I break it into 2 sets of skills, what I call school skills and soft skills, and my 19-year-old informed me that these are front of the bus, back of the bus skills, and I got 1 kid in each camp. So the school skills, as I call it, is really a love, a passion for science, for biology, understanding how things work, anatomy, physiology. So if that's not something you've taken or you're interested in, it's an easy thing to pick up as an extra class, or find a mentor who can bring you there. Math is important, and by that I'm talking just basic arithmetic, not calculus or anything complicated. I took 3 years of calculus as part of my undergrad. I've never used it a day in my life. So I don't need it, but you get it done if it's part of your degree. Writing is really important in analytical thinking because you're making judgment calls not only on the information you're reading in the chart sometimes, but also what do I have to talk to this doctor about versus what can wait? What do I need to talk to my manager about versus what can wait? And then on the soft side, you really need to like people. It's pretty hard to be in clinical research and be not talking with colleagues and other folks. I think you have to have positive energy overall because you have to believe in the end game. I gave an example of the bone marrow transplant experience, which is really positive. I can just as easily give you lots of experiences where we tried new therapies, we tried new ways of doing things, and they weren't effective. They didn't work. But that's how you learn. And if you can keep reminding yourself that it's through trial and error that eventually you're able to help patients, you have to maintain that kind of longer-term attitude, kind of like you're doing in school, right? Going to get a degree. Pain and suffering leads to a degree, right? Being inquisitive, of course, that goes along with being in research, and then attention to detail is, of course, important. Where you put a decimal point can make a big difference on patient response. So this is just a little bit of some of the companies that are based here, are either based here or have branches significantly here in Minnesota. I, of course, am at Medtronic currently. St. Jude Medical, Boston Scientific have huge number of employees here. I heard yesterday Medtronic is up to 82,000 global employees. I mean, that's just mind-boggling to me. I don't know, I should look up what the total number of employees are for these companies, but they're always hiring, they're always looking for new people with new ideas and fresh approaches to innovation. relevant degrees, I talked a little bit about this, but these are just some of them that I know I've hired from, and I've probably in my lifetime hired, I don't know, 300 people over my lifetime. I've set up a number of actual brand new clinical research groups when I've been at startup companies. So I've had the luxury of hiring my own staff, which is always nice. Most of the time it's what you inherited, but these are some examples. So really, what is a clinical trial? Medtronic in this case would be the study sponsor. So one of the studies that we're doing, has anybody heard of a micro pacemaker? So it's good. It's great. It's a little tiny little pacemaker that's about the size of my pinky nail. A normal pacemaker is about that, like this big. And the micro pacemaker is implanted up through the groin area and then it's wedged into the heart muscle, where a traditional pacemaker, you put it under the skin and you can see it here because it's pretty big, and then there are wires that go down into the heart, and those wires eventually get old, they can crack, they can break. It's hard, body's a pretty hostile environment and the heart's always moving, right? If it stops moving, it's a bad thing. So we did a study to make sure that this new pacemaker, this micro pacemaker, worked like it's supposed to. So we would be the study sponsor in this case. And we then worked with, I think we had 80 sites all over the world participating in evaluating this new pacemaker. So that's an example of kind of what the study sponsor would do. Now, in addition to the study sponsor, there's a clinical team at the hospital and clinic, but then there's also regulators. So the FDA in the US and outside the United States, there's something called the notified body, and they make sure that basically we don't hurt people, right? That we protect people ethically, morally, that patients are consenting to participating in research, because things don't always work like you're supposed to, and there's oftentimes risk associated with research. So we work together, the three of us, in order to protect the patient. I won't go through a lot of this detail, but what I want to convey here is that you can participate in clinical research either with the patient, like I did when I first started. There are people who only work in preclinical testing, so they may be doing bench testing how a product works mechanically. So this would be a lot of engineers, software engineers, mechanical engineers. We also do animal research to test biocompatibility, performance. There are people that's what they do full time. Again, it's about animal protection while doing research and the actual research. There are people who develop a clinical strategy and figure out, should we even pursue this? Is there enough of a medical need? What's the risk benefit? And then where I spent most of my time is in actually doing the research, finding the patients, training the hospitals, training the doctors, collecting the data, writing the reports, submitting it to regulatory authorities, and then getting approval to actually sell the product. So you can participate in any one of these phases for a career. You can move along this continuum. There's just so many different options that you kind of almost get overwhelmed at what your number of choices are that you have in participating in clinical research. So, kind of in summary, why do I think it's the best job in the world? I can't imagine doing anything else. I'm just grateful for this program because I learn as much from my fellow instructors as I do from the students about what's new, what's innovative, how can we make things move more quickly and better. Because we're helping large groups of people, again, on a global scale, not just Minnesota. Our population need is growing as we're aging, and I'm never bored, ever. I've never for 1 minute been bored. And I love to travel, I love to meet new people, I love to have new experiences, and I certainly probably would never have been able to go to, for example, China or Israel on my dime. I doubt I would have ever done that, so nice somebody else could go there. So the need here is real. As we're aging, We're expecting that by 2050, almost 21% of the population will be over 65. So to come up with medical innovation that will be cost effective, not bankrupt our health economy, and help people to age kind of gracefully and more healthfully, this is a real need that is not going to go away. So this isn't one of those jobs that it's like, well, you're not going to see an assembly line taking care of this situation. It's going to take researchers and people in order to move it forward. This is just showing that. Some additional needs. So if you're not necessarily interested in research but patient care, registered nurses are expected to increase. But this is comparing 2005 to 2030, for example. Registered nurses, 900,000 more, or 900 more nurses are expected in that space, for example. I mean, we're going to see healthcare needs increase on research, healthcare needs increase for patient care in all of these spaces. So I think it's got nurses, dentists, pharmacists, it's anything associated with medicine and clinical research space is going to, it's just going to continue to explode. So according to CNN, this is back in 2012. Pay range is pretty high. I think if you come in with experience like I did, with a median pay of $90,000, I think if you're a brand new grad and you don't have any experience, I looked it up before I came today, it's more like 65, which is not small potatoes. I could live on that. I did live on that. And the top pay is $129, but I know people who are even doing better than that, depending on if they're a manager or not. So it's a career that is, I think, fairly compensated for the work that you're doing. It's, as I said, not only U.S. centered but global. So most people that are interested in global experiences come to clinical research for that experience. There are companies that do only focus in certain geographies, but they are a little more difficult to find. Most companies are looking at global research. Patients, we're pooling that data from all over. I've been successful with both Europe and the U.S. in using U.S. data to support European and vice versa. So that's been great. The number of trials are growing. So this is from 2000 to just 2017. You can see the hockey stick curve here of just huge acceleration in research. And I know with this new administration, there's a lot of talk of reducing bureaucracy associated with the FDA, and we're hoping that that translates into even more opportunities for clinical research as funds are freed up. So clinical is what I focused on, but I intersect with regulatory quite a bit because the laws really dictate a lot of what we do. If you're somebody who prefers to stay maybe more behind the scenes and not direct patient data interaction, or working with regulatory, there's also the quality systems, and that's all the framework that keeps us, again, ethical and compliant to the law. So there's opportunity to participate in clinical research indirectly through the quality systems. So that is all I have. Do you have any questions?
What does a typical day look like for you?
That's a good question. Well, so today, I'll give you today, I started my morning with conference calls with my staff that are based in Switzerland and in the Netherlands at 7 to help deal with a staff resourcing issue. So that's not too exciting, but at least I got to talk to somebody with a French accent and somebody in the Netherlands, which I don't get to do every day. And then I had a staff meeting today where we talked about a few manuscripts that are basically synopsis of seminal research work that we're doing in the area of deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's and how we're going to roll those manuscripts out over the next few weeks. And then I had a one-on-one meeting with one of my staff, which I do weekly with each of my staff. And I got in my car and raced over here and And then this afternoon, I'm getting on a plane to go to Washington to meet with this group that's looking at, endpoint, how to define endpoints and clinical success in post-market surveillance for interventions associated with stroke. So that's one day.
What would a day look like for an incoming person?
For an incoming person, it is a internal, in-house, or a field person?
Either one.
Either one. So yeah, when I first went into industry, which was a transition for me to go from academia in the clinical environment into industry, it's a business, right? Hospitals, there are more businesses now today than they were back when I was working in them, but businesses are very different than hospitals. So working in industry, I think there's more paperwork, certainly documenting what you're doing, but reading a protocol, so you understand how the study's set up, how it works, reading the patient consent, getting on the phone with the nurses in particular at a hospital or a clinic to help make sure that they are collecting all the right data, that they have all the right paperwork, and then you're looking at the actual information on how a product performs to determine whether or not you're meeting your pre-specified criteria. You're helping submit information into a report that will go to the FDA, phone calls, emails associated with those activities.
And there's jobs that are just as high paying or just as rewarding in this research kind of field for people who are more biology and chemistry oriented, but not as much people and like writing oriented, correct?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So there are jobs that are in the that continuum that I showed you in the pre-clinical area, so doing all kinds of testing on biocompatibility, so that would be the biology, sterilization of products, packaging of products, and the testing associated with that. And if it's a combination product, so we also do a lot of research in drug pumps. So now that's combining an implantable drug pump, that's combining drugs and a device. We call it a combo product. And so in that case too, if somebody who's has more of a background in chemistry can participate in all kinds of testing associated with that.
And they're open to all these new ideas and they allow projects and all sorts of things.
Yeah, it's, it depends on the culture of the company and kind of where you're at within a given company. I mean, Medtronic's enormous, for example, and I tend to I love innovation, I love new things. If it's scary, I'm there, right? That's just kind of the way I'm wired. If you're more conservative, maybe you want to start with something that's more well-defined. So within big companies, there are areas, pockets of where innovation is what they're focusing on, and they want to hire those kind of people who are really interested and good at that. But they also have a lot of areas where, don't rock the boat here, we just need you to do what we need you to do. So you kind of have to know yourself and where your best fit is, but also know that you can change, right? You can and you should change as you learn more.
How are undergraduate or graduate students able to access these spaces? For example, in academia, if we can go shadow a doctor or someone and just kind of get to know what's going on, whereas a company that might be.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I just noticed actually Medtronic, for example, has internship programs for new grads. But I also, through St. Cloud State, I actually had the first student within the ACR program come and do an internship within my group in order to fulfill part of her graduate program. But we were the first in my group to do that. We can set up I'll set up shadowing, and if it's not my group and the work we're doing you're interested in, I'm so well connected I can find you somebody somewhere that's in the area of interest that you have. I mean, it's just a passion of mine. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if other people hadn't given me these opportunities, and I think all of the adjunct faculty for these programs, the pay is not real good. Please don't record that. but the passion we have around sharing what we know and making sure that all of your bright minds get integrated into companies, we're absolutely committed to that. So even if it's not a formal program, we can get you connected. Yes.
What would you say is the biggest drawback or challenge of what you do at your job?
For me personally, the politics of it all, yeah. And I think part of that is because I came up through nursing where it's really all about patient care, and it's hard to always keep money in mind when you're trying to help a patient. But you know, Earl Bakken is the one who really helped me grow up in that area. And he said he made mistakes trying to do too much with a limited amount of money, and you end up not doing anything well. But you have to pick and choose, and that's hard. It's really hard when you have all this need, you see all the need, but you can't do everything or you won't do anything well. So I had to kind of develop that discipline, that business discipline, and I fight it every day. Right? So, but everybody's wired different. I got other people on the other side going, what are you talking about? What's the big deal? It's all about money, and that's what really matters. And thank goodness they're there because I'd probably be bankrupt. Other questions?
So you talk about your children and how you love traveling and going to these adventurous places. When I think about back in the 60s, just comparing doctors who dedicate their entire lives and never see their children.
Yeah.
And how do you balance the travel?
I'm so glad you're asking that. It's been a wild ride. So, for example, my son was born, and 3 months later, they said, we have this problem with the product. We need somebody to move to Europe to go travel to all these doctors to evaluate this product. And I'm 3-month-old. And I said, well, I can go. And they said, well, what about Jake? And I said, well, he's easy. I could just carry him along. And you know what the company did? I was the only woman in the entire organization at the time, and the only nurse. I was surrounded by engineers, so I was already this strange person, right? And then I raised my hand to say, I'll do it. Oh, and I'll hold my kid along. You know what? They paid for me to bring my mother-in-law over to Maastricht in the Netherlands. And I lived in an apartment across the street from the building, and we lived over there for almost 9 months. And so I would see him at night. Actually, he was little enough that she would, over on lunch, she would get a signal, she'd raise the shade on the window if he was awake and I should come over for lunch. If he was asleep, she'd keep it down. So you get creative and you find, just raise your hand and ask. Both my boys lived with my husband and I when we were in Europe. My husband was with AMS at the time, and we're in London. AMS paid half of the rent of our flat, and Angie on the company I was with paid the other half. So we just got super creative and brought the kids along, and as they got more involved in activities and that sort of thing, I kind of had to settle down a little bit more, not travel as much. But you'll find that if it makes sense for the company and if you're not extravagant with your costs, I've been treated really well.
In that same vein of traveling, how if somebody wanted to go into the field for the express purpose of being able to travel internationally, is that something that can happen, or is it more just a luck of the draw, it happened?
Yeah, you have to earn it, right? You have to have something to bring to the table, right? So you travel for the sake of travel, it's called vacation, right? Yeah. But this opportunity for me to be able to go to Maastricht, which was my first assignment internationally, came not because I was so much international travel. I lived in Germany as a foreign exchange student when I was in high school, so at least I wasn't afraid to travel. But it was really more because I knew the product really well, and I had good communication skills, and I could deal with difficult situations, even though I wasn't an engineer, right? So a lot of going against me. I wasn't an engineer. That was probably the biggest thing, that I didn't understand the sort of technical pieces, but because I was good at negotiating and solving issues and staying positive and that sort of thing, and was willing to do it, right? So I think part of it is being in the right place at the right time. If this product hadn't had an issue, there wouldn't have been an opportunity, but also making yourself somebody who's perceived as flexible and has what I call those softer skills in addition to, in this case, understanding the product. Good question. Others? Julie, anything I missed or?
No,
Guys? Okay. Great. I think you guys have paid really good attention over lunch without eating anything, so thank you for the opportunity to be here.